Hey folks, it's Joe here from josephcarter.ca. In this tutorial I'm going to show you my technique for processing RAW files in Adobe Camera RAW. I actually have 3 images loaded up here. I went out this morning in an attempt to take a shot of the Anděl metro station here in Prague. I went out at 5:30 in hopes I could get there before the morning crowds, but unfortunately I couldn't get a single image without a couple people in each one. So by processing all 3 of these, I will be able to cut certain areas out of each, layer them together, and that way I will have an image with no people. So first things first, I've got my files loaded here into Camera RAW. If you are processing more than one file at a time, make sure you have them all highlighted so that they're all being edited at once. First thing I do is I'll adjust the white balance. I already shot these using the fluorescent white balance because I knew it's fluorescent lighting in there, but assuming I didn't, many people leave their camera set to daylight or auto, and sometimes it misjudges. So basically just flip through the presets, see what looks best for you. If you don't find one that works best for you, you can adjust the temperature and the tint until you find it the way you like it. But fluorescent lights usually work pretty much all the same, so fluorescent actually works really good here. So next thing I do usually is correct for distortion and vignetting. Sorry, I actually clicked on remove chromatic aberration, which I usually do just after I correct for distortion, so no problem, we'll do it now. Obviously look a little closer at your picture and see whether you have anything to correct, but I know in this image I have some chromatic aberration around the final fluorescent light here. So you can see what I'm talking about. And yeah, I've already removed it. You can just see a very slight blue line above the light. By clicking this, it pretty easily and usually pretty effectively removes that. So now on to the distortion and vignetting. Camera already has figured out which lens camera setup I'm using and has adjusted accordingly. Unfortunately, I'm still here in Prague on vacation. I'm doing this tutorial on my piece of garbage Acer laptop, so it's pretty laggy. I apologize for that. I'll try and cut out the loading when I edit the video. So here we are with the distortion corrected. I'll turn that off, back on again so you can see the difference. It really straightens out all the lines, takes out the barrel distortion. That looks pretty good to me right now. So go back to the main basic page here. Next thing I do is adjust my highlights and shadows. Generally speaking, I find it works best to just crank these all the way to 100. So I'll bring my highlights all the way down, bring my shadows all the way up. It's going to make your image look very gray, but by adjusting the contrast now we will kind of counteract that. And this way we have as much of the information as we can to work with. So we've brought back a lot of the highlights in these lights here, and we've also brought up a lot of the shadowy dark areas, and by adding contrast back, as you will see just now, it will take that gray look away, but this way we have a lot of detail. My goal is to try and make the image look almost like HDR, because that basically just means you have as much of the dynamic range in the image so it looks as natural as possible. I'm generally not a fan of HDR, mostly because a lot of people don't really know how to use it properly and end up making those garish looking haloed kind of horror movie looking images that most photographers cringe when they look at, but many people when they first get into HDR don't really recognize how badly they're butchering the image until they've spent a bit of time with it. But my goal is to kind of get as close to that haloing as possible without taking it too far. So here we are. I'll give you a little preview of what we've done so far. Just really brought out quite a bit of the detail, especially in these marble arcades here. And the other thing I like to use is the clarity, and it's basically another contrast slider, but it seems to me to bring out more detail rather than just focusing on specific light dark contrasts. It's a strange tool, but it really does bring out a lot of detail. If I crank it all the way up, it's going to look almost like an HDR. There's quite a bit of haloing around these lights, and it's maybe made these arcades look a little bit brighter than they really need to be. So I'll bring that back down, but I kind of like the extra detailed look in this specific image, so I'm going to leave quite a bit of that in there. So right around 50 seems to work. Maybe bump the contrast up a little bit as well. Yeah, so both of those around 50 looks good. The next thing I like to do is adjust the color saturation. Usually I like to do that using the vibrance slider rather than saturation. As far as I understand, vibrance basically saturates the least saturated colors first. So basically, if I was to turn up the saturation, it's going to attack these yellows and oranges, and it's going to make them look unrealistically saturated. So I find if I just avoid using saturation altogether and just concentrate on the vibrance, it makes a much more realistic looking color saturation. So just to show you what the vibrance really does, I've turned it all the way up to 100, and it's kind of avoided these yellows and oranges, but it's brought out all of the yellow in the ceiling, all of the yellow in the floor, which I don't necessarily want. I'd like as much saturation as I can, but it is a white subway station. I want it to stay white in my final image. So now bringing it back down to 50, it almost looks desaturated. Move it up just a little bit more, around 60, and I really like that. A lot of guys are afraid to touch the vibrance and saturation, and I think it's because when you first start out, you tend to push the saturation as high as you can get it to go, and you don't really know where is too far. You end up making a sky that's just too blue, and when you show somebody, they say, what is this, photoshopped or something? And then you kind of look back and realize, yeah, maybe I went too far. And I think a lot of guys kind of become afraid of saturation, but when you're shooting raw, you really do have to play with everything a little bit, see what you do need to brighten, what you do need to darken. You know, a lot of the time in a raw file, I should say almost all of the time, your colors are a little bit unsaturated. You do need to bring them up a little bit. Don't be afraid to play with it. Just don't go too far with it. So this is looking pretty good to me. Just show you what we started with again. Kind of gray. It looks natural, but it's not that nice looking. It's kind of has a gray overtone to it. So we've basically brought out a lot of detail in the marble, quite a bit of detail in the floor. The lights seem to glow a little bit more, and yeah, I'm liking the way this is looking. Basically the last thing I'll do is adjust the sharpening. I just happen to know with this lens camera setup, it's just a kit lens for a Canon 500D. It really likes it right around 75 here. I don't think you're going to really see the sharpening over the internet anyways, so I'm not going to zoom in at all, but just you should really zoom into 100% and kind of sharpen it as much as you can before you start getting grain in the smooth areas. You want to avoid that, and you can play with the noise reduction a little bit, but I find if you've used a tripod and you've used a good enough aperture, I've used f/16 here, so I should have pretty sharp depth of field throughout, and I find that up at 75 it works pretty good almost all the time. So, and that's about it for the RAW. So in the next tutorial I will bring these files into Photoshop. I'll show you how to clone in different sections so we can get rid of these people in the background here and have an empty subway station. I'll probably brighten up this floor a little bit. It still looks a little bit muddy. I could definitely bring out a little bit more of the ceiling reflection, and probably just work a little bit more on the localized contrast. So I'll probably separate this ceiling out from the arcades from the floor, so I'll make 3 different layers and adjust the contrast for each of them separately. So yeah, I'll show you all that in the next tutorial. If you want to follow my website at josephcarter.ca, I'll be putting more blog posts, not necessarily videos, on there, so please check that out. Keep checking back on the YouTube channel, and I should be putting up more tutorials on here. And yeah, thanks for watching.